Okay, hello everyone. My name is Shajit Dasgupta. I'm going to talk to you today about order and chaos. This is all about disaster recovery in AWS before, during, and after. And I'm joined by some folks in Zoom chat today, so thank you. And once again, thank you to Kathy and the AWS DMV users group for the opportunity. Let me jump right in. Um, so there we go. Perfect. So we have, this is, my whole setup. I am Shajith. I'm a cloud security architect. I also run a meetup called Code With Me, and I also help advise some startups. In terms of scope, I like to just kind of preview my talk before I give it, just so people feel like they know the various, directions it takes. The first, it's all about roughly what disaster recovery, and what that domain really means. Then I sort of go over how DR is in the AWS ecosystem. I also review the 5 Rs of disaster recovery, go over some best practices, ask the audience for some more stories. And lastly, I sum up with how AI has impacted the field in the last few years. Also, this is just a simple glossary. And also, Kathy, I would normally share the link to this talk during the session, so I'll post it in the Zoom chat. The
Yeah,
reason for that, yeah.
yeah, go ahead and put that in chat. And Kim, maybe you could put that in the description when it goes up on YouTube.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the reason for this for folks in chat, I was never a big fan of anxiously taking notes while hearing a lecture. I like to just share everything up front. That way, if I missed anything or I went over something too fast, you can always refer to it in my presentation. I also include a glossary, so you're not like getting a bunch of random definitions from 6 different sources. You're getting it from me. So yeah, essentially this is the whole setup. I'm going to reference all of these terms, and in the following slides, I'm going to kind of go through them a bit quickly, but I will pause and stop and accept questions as needed. And obviously the best practice slides is where a lot of discussion happens. So let me run through the set of the talk. A prereq of DR, I like to spend a few seconds on this. You really need a great data strategy, mainly around backups and keeping backups secure. And you really need a good incident response team / on-call team if you're supporting huge amounts of customers and such. Having an incident response along with your DevSecOps team to handle production incidents for all your customers for your app is super important if they expect users to have a high sense of availability. Now,
can I just chime in
sure.
real quick? Sorry,
Sure.
this is something I was very surprised in cloud, is that a lot of people confuse availability and DR, right? Like just because you've got failover and multi-AZ environments, that doesn't mean you're backed up. It just means your environment is available, not
Yes.
that should you get attacked, you have something to recover from.
Yes. I think that's really important because that actually ties into this. Let me skip a few slides. Right here, your recovery point is basically your last secure backup, and then the disaster has hit. So the data loss is roughly measured from when was your last proper backup. And so essentially, a lot of people, as you just said, will say, hey, well, I'm back up. I should be fine. But it's like between the time that the disaster struck and you're back up, you're going to have a recovery time. And between the time the disaster struck and corrupted your active database, you're going to have to recover from a past point. So literally the time before, literally, and the time after really matter. And so my whole goal of this kind of whole presentation is just to sort of go over what we're looking at with minimizing RPO and RTO. But no, that was a great mention. I also like to say avoid any kind of too perfect statistics. This is a very common statistic I used to see in a lot of DR presentations by companies, they would say 60% go out of business within a data breach. Then they would tell the company to sign up for a product. It's even quoted on the SBA.gov website, but it's been proven wrong by the agency that says that this quote. Essentially, by the National Cybersecurity Alliance, they've already disproven the statement, and they say that this statistic is not right. We didn't generate it. Don't use it. And so what I'm trying to get at here is DR is often used to scare you and make a decision fast for you, and sometimes give a third party access to your data. That's not really the goal. The goal is to ensure a smooth, repeatable system where you have regular backups within your org and you can get back up in time once a disaster has struck. So, and I'll talk to Joe and Sergio here since, they are essentially my audience in a sense. I want to tie DR back to Eisenhower, who was a really influential president during the Cold War. While this might seem a little dramatic, Eisenhower actually first defined what an emergency is, and he defined it as something that is unexpected. And during that time, the threat of nuclear annihilation was very relevant. And so a nuclear bomb was considered the original disaster. And most of the military and IT and telecoms industries would prepare around what a nuclear attack would do and how to recover from it, or how to provide degraded services around it. And so his whole speech actually talks about how to react to a disaster. I highly recommend people read it. But the takeaways from the speech are awesome because he sums up some of the key principles really well. Basically says strict adherence to a plan under change is a horrible idea. Short, optimized strategy to recover from a disaster is a good idea. And being adaptable with end recovery in mind is a good idea. And his famous quote is, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. I would 100% confirm that. A lot of people think that, oh, why do I do all these SOPs? Why do I do all these drills? They all seem sort of pointless. When when horrible things happen, I'm going to want to hide, or we're going to want to, stop the burn. And all of that is correct. But does your team know what to do after they stop the fire, after they get to a sense of calm, or even in the midst of chaos? Will they grab the right backups, stop the bleed, and fix the situation correctly? And that sort of doomsday prep, or that sort of scenario and exercise, is really what disaster recovery is about. Doing it before the disaster, obviously during, and recovering enough after and changing things. And metrics of DR. I've debated renaming this slide actually. What I mean by this is how multiple industries think of DR. If you're a project manager, you're going to learn about the risk management framework in the PMP exam, and that's all about accept, mitigate, or transferring risk. Elimination is usually too expensive. And if you're coming in from the cybersecurity angle, you're going to learn of the CIA triad with confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If you're coming from my life, which is DevOps and SRE, you're going to think about the 5 R's of DR with risk, resilience, readiness, response, recovery. And all in all of these are correct ways to think about DR, because a disaster affects everyone. If you're a PM of a program and a disaster has struck, it's the same amount of pain, maybe more, maybe less, than if you're the SRE or the DevOps engineer, than if you're the cybersecurity engineer, than if you're the network engineer, if you're the user, all of that. And so all of us do need to prepare, think, and plan for DR. Simply put, that's super key. Now I kind of go into best practices. I do recommend folks, ask me questions as they need. These are pretty critical slides, and I may go through them a bit fast, but understand that they all build off of each other. So there's 5 key ways and 5 key practices to approach disaster recovery. And I highly recommend your organization, or even you as an engineer, follow a lot of these, or even if you're a PM, etc. Make sure your team follows a lot of these systems. One is active passive sites. Now, whenever I say this, people say, oh, it's really expensive to run hot. What that means is it's really expensive to stand up my infrastructure, then replicate it again, have no traffic in the secondary infrastructure, and just have it burn up a cloud bill. I completely agree. That is incredibly expensive. What I'm trying to sort of guide people in is consider hot cold, consider on standby, consider just having everything in an IAC process, infrastructure as code, be able to start up and practice that routing and failover, which lo and behold, that's going to be my next slide. But the idea is simply have a hot and cold or hot and warm setup ready if your budget and capabilities allow for it. If it doesn't, consider just having your hot site ready with a load balancer out front with excellent alerting and having all the infrastructure implemented in a Kubernetes script or in a, just a simple script to kick off a CloudFormation stack or whatever is your launch infrastructure, and just have maybe an account in another region that would be your official account. When disaster strikes, you have to understand it's not just your company that the disaster has struck to. Well, yes, it could be that. It often is a region-wide disaster. So everyone around you, if you're in US East 1, everyone's going to US West, or everyone's trying to go to Europe. So you have to, as an organization, plan for this by having accounts in both Europe and US West. B, have scripts and the IAC ready, the infrastructure as code, to launch your infrastructure in either region. And B, have the expertise on hand to move the relevant databases and the backups and the traffic route properly. And these two naturally go hand in hand. Do failover exercises. Even if it's just to a dummy program, to a dummy database, have it route from one of the big key things is to do sister cities. So have it route from Philadelphia to Phoenix. Yes, Kathy.
A quick question on that. So in multi-AZ failover, do you have any guidance on choosing which region to go into just from a, a speed standpoint, right? Like, is Europe your best choice, or are you going west because you're closer to your customers?
Sure, no, that's a great question. So this is really organizationally dependent. Obviously, if you're a US East customer and business, you're going to immediately want to go to Central or West Coast just because the time zones are so applicable. But it really depends on where your support team lies. Because for one of my companies that I've worked at, I was at Adobe for a while, I was a CSE there. We would often divert to Europe because we had a whole support team set up in Romania. And so for us, diverting to Europe just made a lot of sense. While, yes, there were plenty of West Coast customers, if they were hit by a disaster, they would divert to more Japan. And simply put, we just had our patterns to go away from the US in case we didn't want to overload a fellow team within the US. But this is all organizational style, I call it, or just, whatever the training is. But often you want a team outside of your time zone. And so if you're East Coast and you're moving it to Central, that's only 1 hour behind. The moment you log off at 5, like they're going to log off within an hour of that or an hour before. And at the end of the day, if something goes down, it goes down again. But if I shifted it to Europe, then to a degree, when it's late my time, it would be early their time. They could pick up the ball as soon as I'm ready to go to bed, kind of a thing. And so we would often do these sort of across time zone migrations because it just helped keep up a 24/7 support cycle. Hope that answered your question, but the short answer is it's often up to the company's best practices. Awesome. Joe and Sergio, I know I haven't said hi to Sergio especially, but feel free to chime in or ask any questions, or do the hand raise feature as you need. Okay. So, and one other key thing is there's a very tiny nugget I'll throw in there. I've been a DevOps engineer for over a decade. I do want to tell folks about sticky sessions. Sticky sessions is often considered amazing for load balancers and user experience, but we've often found that sticky sessions can lead to, if there's a hanging task, like a Java trace error that's just reoccurring, if you leverage a sticky session, it keeps going back to the same server that's processing the task because it's literally by definition sticky. So it's going to go back to that same server. And it will often bring down infrastructure because of that hanging task. So I do want to advise having some sort of a circuit breaker or such within your framework because sticky sessions can mean the death of certain servers. It's just a very tiny nugget I'm throwing in there, but we've often seen with certain compromising cybersecurity incidents, you can overload servers pretty easily if an application hangs. All right. Alerting and automation. This slide to most seems very obvious, but I have to say, I am always surprised when a certain org doesn't do these things. At the end of the day, we can't watch the screen and refresh every second or every minute. We'll often step away, we'll often work on other IT projects, or often just, be sleeping. And simply put, able to know how your infrastructure is doing is so key. And what do I mean by that? Yes, do CloudWatch. Okay, sure, I do CloudWatch. Do you have a way to alert customers? That can't always be an email. Sometimes you need to do CloudWatch. That's then going to alert the DevOps team. If it's serious enough, the DevOps team should update a down detector style website. What do I mean by that? Major services like Adobe Experience Manager, even IBM, a lot of these places have a down detector style website where they actively say AEM is actively running, or it is down, or it is compromised, or get in touch with your customer success engineer. Yes, it may look bad for business, but what looks worse for business is if you can't properly provide the information that you're down and that your customer doesn't know what's going on. That's even worse. If you're able to start P1s, if you're able to communicate with their DevOps team, if you're able to tell them what's going on, that you're actively investigating it, that you will fix it, these things all improve customer relations. And in the end, it could mean a disaster lost you a customer, or a disaster built a stronger sense of transparency and trust with your customer. So I think this slide, while as simple as it seems, is super key. Also, there's something huge I want to call out here, which is root cause analysis. I think everyone has bugs in code, everyone has bugs in their pipeline and their process, but they often ignore these bugs because they're small, because they're yellow, because they're minimal effect. Maybe they just, want to get to the release cycle. They just want to be done with their day. Completely understandable. We all have been there. But I am really impressed when a team has a strong culture of root cause analysis on bugs. As simple as that sounds, having it assigned automatically to engineers whose basic performance is tied to tickets cleared, while that may seem frustrating, is amazing because it incentivizes a lot of engineers to go and investigate these smaller bugs. Maybe they're not your primary SRE team. Maybe there's a secondary team that just looks into code and into process improvement. But involve them, have them tie in with their DevOps engineer, have them fix these, make updates to your OS or your system or your packages or your whatever is causing the bug. It sounds like a small thing, but it's actually pretty huge. And of course, auto scaling and automation of that is important. Using metrics for, this is 80% of capacity, we need to launch another one. Stuff like that, super important as well. Okay. And that sort of also scaled into, or literally got into scalability in Cloudburst. I want to share a personal story here because I think it will help sort of bring this in. I started DevOps back in about 2015, 2016. And that is, I was a Java developer and I switched into DevOps. And in one of my very first jobs, I worked at Blackstone Technologies and I worked for disasterassistance.gov. And there I was essentially able to, I acted as the DevOps engineer on site for them. And so at Blackstone Technologies, I was able to do the proper DevOps configurations, recovery, baseline control, all of that. And what happened one day was we saw 1,000x web traffic overnight. Now, I'm not telling the whole story. Obviously, we knew Hurricane Harvey was going on. We were supporting disasterassistance.gov. We planned for the surge. We pre-warmed systems, we set up Cloudburst and other technologies, and we, reserved a whole bunch of instances in time. But what I'm trying to say here is it was way more than we ever imagined in terms of the traffic we got from worried citizens trying to get to relief zones, just worried people. Anyone with the internet IP would go to da.gov to literally get relief. And so, as you can see the numbers here, 738,000 applied for relief. 792. And I'm sorry, one thing's wrong with those numbers, but I'll fix that. But in the 100x applied, 200x homes were destroyed. And so this literally was one of the biggest natural disasters. It was a Cat 4 hurricane, and it really was the early days of AWS and leveraging cloud technology in AWS and doing disaster recovery saved lives. And so I want to say, while all of this may seem like, another day in the office, another set of things, some of this stuff can be really meaningful to people in real life. And so I'm just grateful that I was able to be a part of the team and help out with this. This is early in my DevOps career, so I definitely didn't have a strong appreciation back then as to what we did. I definitely do now. And lastly, rubber hits the road. I love this slide because it ties in my undergrad. I studied mechanical engineering. Rubber hits the road is when you would play test or road test a car, and you would literally have the rubber of the tire hit the road, and you would just see how your efficiencies worked out with the fuel you used and the type of car you built. I think the whole goal of it, though, is to test it before you released the car to the public and told everyone that it's safe to drive in. I think more testing definitely needs to be done in IT. I'm not saying it isn't done. I'm just saying the value of testing often goes out the window, and they think that if they implement enough good plans, have everything written down, people understand what's going to happen, and then they do it live, it's all going to work out. And simply put, just having a staging environment is not enough. Having a staging and DevOps approach of graduating environments, that's good. But what about when you actually implement something that affects production? Is there any way we could mock that? Is there any way we could involve our networking team, our security team, our users, mock test, smoke test, and do all of that together? That's the whole goal of this slide. When rubber hits the road, that's when 90% of your problems happen and actually are seen in front of you. And so you can have a million calls, planning sessions, documents, and everything, but a trial run does so much. And it gets everyone into the zone, it gets everyone locked in, and it gets everyone to be ready to do what they need to do here. Okay. So this is where I like to let people open up. I know I just vomited a bunch of information. I would love to hear from Joe, Sergio, Kathy, or Kim if you guys have any experience with this, and maybe any comments you want to make around disaster recovery. Feel free to unmute.
Joe, go ahead.
I was wondering about the current relationship between the SRE and DevOps worlds regarding this topic. Thanks.
Sure. Let me clarify that with you. SRE, site reliability engineer, DevOps engineer, both are pretty similar or interchangeable from what I've seen at companies. Do you just kind of want a current look as to how do they do disaster recovery, or is there something more specific?
I've seen that certain organizations differentiate between those two terms. I was wondering how widespread that differentiation is. I think you've answered that. The answer is not very widespread. But I think it gets into another topic of that developers and administrators, so to say, have different viewpoints on disaster recovery, different ideas on what's important. I'm wondering what you've seen involving that. Have you seen
Sure,
differences?
So I'll give you the broader difference between DevOps and SRE because I've had that question come up actually, and I do use those independently, or sorry, interchangeably. But if we had to be super like particular on terms, DevOps is described as a philosophy, like the overall goals of how do we make developers and operations work together and be more seamless. And SRE, site reliability, that's seen more as a more implementation heavy engineer type role, which is just how can we quickly fix issues that are happening and how can we automate parts of the fixes and the engineering discipline. Also, platform engineering comes up. That is just simply to maintain the most stable platform for customers to come onto, deploy their code, and achieve their business needs in. And that is quite similar as well, but as you can probably tell, between what a DevOps engineer does, SRE engineer does, and a platform engineer does, roughly all pretty similar. Now, the second part of your question there, do you mind repeating it? Or did I cover most of what you were wondering?
Thanks. That covers most of it.
Okay.
I was wondering if you've seen also much difference in what developers and operations administrators are concerned about in disaster recovery.
Yes. Sorry, I do remember that now. So I think that disaster recovery, so this is where I kind of go a little off script. I even kind of bash my own presentation. And let me explain. A lot of times, disaster recovery sounds great. I mean, if you and I had unlimited funds, we would prep the heck out of a disaster. It makes a lot of sense. It's a great way to train a team, have good IT practices, have a stable team, and just achieve a great set of frameworks and just setup. But the problem here is the finances, right? It always comes down to budget. And at the end of the day, DevOps and disaster recovery, it could go on forever. You could always be more and more prepared. You could always spend more money. You could have 2 hot sites. You could have 3 hot sites. You could, expand tons of infrastructure. So I think being able to tail that in and be very particular on what exactly your organization needs and pre-warm instances for holiday peaks and have a solid on-call team to respond to active security alerts, those are really key to have because at the end of the day, having a good on-call team, having a good cybersecurity team, having a good alerting infrastructure, having good hosting practices, trained engineers, a connected team between networking and your DevOps and your developers, they all know when a release is happening. All of that just sounds like good IT. That does not sound like disaster recovery. So what I would really recommend is how you can tie it to other organizations' goals. And also, I've seen a lot of platform or just program managers think of DevOps and disaster recovery as like IT insurance. How can we properly prepare for what could happen, what could lose all our data, what could affect all our customers? But at the end of the day, you either save money or make more money. And so disaster recovery falls under future savings. Like if we don't do this now, we could lose all of our customer data, thus lose like half of our customers. So we have to think of it that way to at least start the first steps, which is have a great backup setup, have a good security infrastructure to tell when things are happening, have good alerting and automation. But Obviously, for engineering, it's seen as a discipline and a practice. For PMs, they're more interested in the bottom line, as they should be, and this just has to tie in correctly with their organizational goals.
Hey, Shajid, I wanted to throw something out there. I worked for a cybersecurity company that specifically dealt with backups for a bit. I think another thing that people don't talk about enough is they assume they have recoverable backups, right? Like you talked about, you need to do a tabletop or do some live, chaos monkey kind of stuff. But what we found is, especially in the case of like ransomware, they've been infecting your system for 90 days because they know that's your retention period. And then, they fire the thing off at day 91, knowing that any backup you try to recover from, you're just going to keep reinfecting yourself. So just any thoughts on like ensuring that that backup is, clean and recoverable?
Yeah, I actually suffered, not me personally, but obviously one of my clients suffered an attack similar to that, where about 4 to 5 months of backups were compromised. And we only found this out because we would, do a backup of like 1 month ago. And we were like, oh no, this backup has that same recurring issue. And then we would go back 2, 3, 4 months. And we found eventually there's actually some organizations have a tool like this. It depends on your organization how the code base works, if they can properly scan your backups or your code. But essentially at Adobe, we were able to scan all our backups and tell if it was infected or not based on the files and the repeating patterns that we kept seeing in our code. And so I think it's really important to determine integrity of a backup. I think I actually mentioned that back in one of my slides.
Yeah.
But essentially, integrity of your backup is really important. Because a lot of people don't look into that and look into how to properly do that. And so that's a great call out. Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe AWS Backup has this baked in now.
Oh, perfect. Okay, that makes it even better. And yeah, any other war stories people would like to share? Okay. So there's only one last part. Everyone loves this part, impact of AI. Do I even need to do disaster recovery anymore? Can they just do it for me? I would definitely say no. I mean, obviously that might, sound self-serving, like, I want to stay employed, and that's why I'm saying no. But I think the core goal here is this is so absolutely critical for your organizational survivability, reputation, just overall profitability. That automating something this critical might be a bit dangerous, and B, a bit just not like there's not a lot of high confidence a lot of IT folks would have in this system. What I mean by this is you can use AI to be assistive. You can have predictive auto scaling based on your past baseline patterns that would study all your spikes and study all your customers and then tell you you should spike more here. But I'll be honest, most good DevOps engineers already have been doing predictive auto scaling. They've just been predicting it. They know during Christmas, they know during campaigns, they know during promotionals, their customers spike. So they pre-warm, they reserve some instances, they let the spikes go, they have good alerting. But still, if you're setting up a newer client, maybe setting up predictive auto scaling would help. Or if you have a client with a lot of past data on traffic, this would help. In terms of smarter DR drills and root cause analysis, there are a lot of companies that simulate outages now, and they simulate them and they test your DR plan. I have seen some customers have some success with this, including in the startup world. I would recommend folks look into this as to how effective it is simulating something virtually versus in real life. That is, really up to budget and up to how much customer interference you're willing to stomach. Obviously, with virtual testing, there is less or a lot less, but how real it is still up for debate. And obviously the other two, the fourth bullet, everyone's doing that, but essentially looking into documentation, looking into how to implement configurations and keep them that way, using AWS config and other tools and their AI assistive features, all wonderful to do. And the first one, incident response, DevOps Guru and New Relic's Grok both are said to essentially do what good DevOps engineers should be doing, which is watching for anomalies, suggesting root causes, and trying to fix them. So this, if effective for your organization, and you can obviously find out by implementing these or by looking at your current anomalies, root cause, and fix situation, could be very assistive to your DevOps or SRE team in implementing. I would not trust this solo, because you do want just a human kind of overseer slash, just verifier. But overall, I think it could be quite effective. Any questions on any of these bullets? Okay. So everyone asks me, oh, so you've studied DR, you've implemented DR, you've worked at a couple of companies. What's one of the most optimized DR plans? Everyone loves this answer because everyone says it in IT. I do say it depends, but I do provide the 4 key things that I think are really important. I think budget, the size of your overall company, and actually some people say the size of your customers, the domain you're in, whether it's healthcare, law, whether it's commercial, telecoms, and SLA requirements that you've established. What availability have you promised? What have you sort of established with the customer is what you will provide? Because all of these things together do determine what type of DR plan you should put together. Also, is simply put, if you're a small like coffee or flower shop, don't make like a $2 million DR plan. Make a DR plan that's relevant to your size. I think that every company judges budget and size differently, but I'll tell you what I've been told by a CTO of a company, a rather large one, cannot say the name. They often think of DR as a 10%. So they look at their overall operating budget, they take 10%, and they think that if they're not spending somewhere close to 10% of their budget ensuring that all of their customers, all of those principles, all of that DR is properly done, then they think that they're not quite ahead or in the ballgame. They think that if they can't ensure, like in the best way I've had it described to me, is say you make $10 million a year. If you don't take $1 million to ensure that the $10 million is made every year, then 1 year, if you were to go through a disaster and you were to see overall outages, massive disruptions to customers, you were to make 5 million that year, it would be horrible. And then in the subsequent years, you would make less or a slightly less than 10 million because you wouldn't have the customer confidence you once did. So he's like, if I took 1 million from you in 1 year and over the next 5 years, I ensured some strong capabilities of your company, you would pay me that million. Because at the end of the day, you might be paying 5 to 10 million for a disaster and more that could come up. So essentially losing 10% of that overall revenue is worth it to that CTO. So I hope that made sense, but essentially you do want to make the correct DR plan for you. That is towards the end of my presentation, so I am more than happy to take questions. Or, if people have questions on previous slides or how they determine
Do you think vibe coding will make any inroads with things like CloudFormation or Terraform configuration?
Yes, I think vibe coding could help people leverage those tools faster. In terms of making good code and reliable code and proficient code, I mean, that always relies on experience. But I think vibe coding could help people make like CDK scripts or Terraform scripts and such.
Do you think we'll see more automated environment testing driven by AI?
That's actually a whole company's plan. So Antithesis literally does that. You guys are welcome to look it up. I've actually interviewed there as well, so I got to learn a lot about them. But their whole claim to fame is like, hey, we'll take your production environment and we will test it virtually in multiple different scenarios and take it through tons of different issues and let you know how it is.
Thanks. Do you see something like that as the next big thing with DevOps and SRE?
I think that doing a real smoke test, a real failover exercise, even if it only affects like 1% of your customers, or it could affect a limited batch, like maybe you have like a beta test app and you run it on in production and you're doing like a 10% failover and you do the proper failover exercise every 10% of your customer or your smaller customer base. I think that always beats any virtual simulation. But in IT you should never be too definitive with your thoughts, because you could be proven wrong within the next 5 years, as I've learned. And so I think overall, I will have to wait and see and try to really see how, profitable and effective Antithesis or other AI simulation platforms are. But I would say overall, the real thing, nothing beats real experience and like real life scenarios, testing.
Yeah, and I think to chime in a little bit, I think like at the more sophisticated ends, Joe, like I know, I don't think I'm talking out of turn here, but like Cap One, they just, if anything happens, they just tear the whole environment down and rebuild it. It's like they're not even concerned with this. So I don't know. Were you over there? I'm trying to
I
remember.
was never at Capital One, but I wish we had David Shepard on the call.
Yeah.
He would've
Yeah.
been great.
David's the one that told me that they just like they're not even concerned about backups because they just tear everything down. But I think sadly for me, I don't think we're gonna see that for several years, Joe, and here's why. People here's how I always explain AI. It reminds me of, hopefully you're of the age this makes sense. It's like kind of why we had our hair all crazy in the 80s. It was because we had these tools all of a sudden we didn't have, right? And so you don't like go little with that. It's the big stuff. And I organized 2 different community days, and like I'm always begging for talks on security and backup and DR because people want to talk about the sexy stuff. And I think it's going to be a couple years before we start seeing AI being talked about in the practical blocking and tackling of infrastructure. I don't know, Shajit, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, AI is obviously the rage for obvious reasons. It's affecting everything. Like if AI only affected the legal field, we would talk about it a lot less. And we would only see it in like lawyer conferences. But it's affecting medicine, law, your day-to-day life, your kids' like homework assignment, like everything. And so you talk about it more for sure. I think of AI as I think of like cloud, as I think of other things. At one point it popped into the scene like the internet, like cloud. It took over, everyone talked about it for a while, then it just became part of every conversation. And I could see AI being like that. I do think that AI is like a newly trained engineer to me. And so a lot of people ask me, like, if you were to manage a cloud infrastructure, what would you do? How would you hire? How would you train up staff? Those same questions should be applied to AI, because you can't just trust, a random instance of a random AI LLM in your production setup. We've already seen it completely delete and wipe and reveal no like accountability to its actions in production instances before. And so all in all, just like doing a rapid adoption of AI is not going to be smart right now. Later, once it's a bit more battle tested, once it's can provide you a proper like, this is what I did and this is why I did it, and you can trust that like log and action report, so to speak, maybe it's better that way. But at the current level, you need to handhold it throughout the process.
I
hope that
wonder if
makes sense.
I wonder if we'll see new DevOps and SRE practices soon regarding AI MCP agents and similar new technology. Will we have to test for new types of security issues, but prompt and hijacking or similar?
For
I
sure.
think root cause analysis is where AI is having the most effect, because AI can analyze code pretty okay, but it can definitely look at repeated things over and over and tell you what's going on. And so AI can look at a Java stack trace better than I can, better than, unless you're like a senior Java engineer that has studied a million different problems about Java, AI is going to beat you at discovering what's wrong with your Java program. So I think there's some things where root cause analysis is a big one. So I think, DevOps engineers, I could see them submitting error reports to AI, trying to be like, what's wrong with this? Or tell me how I can fix this. My main worry is, will they soon lose the skill of knowing what actually is wrong versus what they're being told is wrong?
100%.
That's a valid concern. What you're talking about reminds me of the Dynatrace tool. I'm a little surprised we haven't seen something open source similar to Dynatrace to do that, to do AI driven root cause analysis.
Yeah, as I understand it, it is implemented more in AWS now, but I haven't tried out New Relic Grok. I do want to, I mean, Kathy, that might be something we want the DMV users group,
Yeah, for sure.
DC and Cleveland, to do a talk on, which I could prepare.
Yeah.
That
I
would be
did.
interesting.
I wanted to address something Joe said earlier about, are there new security things we're going to have to pay attention to? We're big fans of Datadog, and they actually have an absolutely excellent AI observability model that will look for hallucinations, that will look for jacking, all of those things. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that's coming. I think that's here today.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Well, I know we're getting up on time. Thank you, Shajit. Sorry for the small audience today. Hopefully, Sergio and Joe, you guys, this was valuable. You got to interact directly with Shajit. Why don't you throw your LinkedIn in the chat? People want to follow up with you later. Thank you so much for the time. And Aditya, you got here at the very end. We're just wrapping up, but we will be putting this online. But that's it. Thank you so much, Shajid. Appreciate your time, and happy Diwali.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy Diwali to everyone. My LinkedIn is just my name, Shajit Dasgupta, but there we go. I can actually put it in. And I want to do it before you stop. Clicking the record button. So one sec.
Happy Diwali.
Diwali. Where is chat? There's chat. Okay.
All right, there you go. All
Awesome.
right, well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time and hope to see you on the next one. Have a great rest of your night.